a lot of the rhetoric that is out there, I think, doesn't help people because it feels like what's required to make it feel better or for you to do better is some massive shift. Meanwhile, we all know that when we accomplish something incredible in our lives, it's usually not some massive shift happened overnight. It's usually the culmination of a whole bunch of small steps that we took over time.
Hi, I'm Blake Schofield, founder and CEO of The Bridge to Fulfillment. Mom to 3, USA Today top 10 professional coach, and former corporate executive who got tired of sacrificing my life for a comfortable paycheck. My mission is to expand perspectives to achieve greater impact at home and work without sacrifice. This is The Bridge to Fulfillment. On today's episode of The Bridge to Fulfillment, I'm talking to guest expert Jason Silver. He's a multi-time founder of kids and a multi-time founder of companies. He gets his biggest thrill helping modern employees and their teams unlock a better way to work. Surfing is a close second. He was an early employee at Airbnb and helped build an AI company from the ground up back before AI was the cool thing to do. Today, he advises a startup portfolio valued in the billions on how to build great, lasting companies that people actually enjoy working for. He's a sought-after public speaker, instructor, and advisor on how to transform work into one of the biggest drivers of positivity for your life. When he's not busy helping people solve their hardest workplace challenges, Jason's kids are busy reminding him just how much of a work in progress he still is too. I loved my time with Jason. I think he brings really tactical, simple, easy strategies you can bring to work today to bring more fulfillment, more happiness, and more ease in your work. We had some really touching conversations about his own personal journey that led him to really shift how he thought about and was living in work. And one of the things I felt was really powerful was his discussion around how do you want to feel at work. It really echoes so much of the work that I do in helping people understand the power that we each have to truly create the type of career and life that we want. And so with that said, I'm so excited to welcome Jason to the podcast and introduce him to you. Welcome, Jason, to the Bridge to Fulfillment. I'm so happy to have you today.
Very happy to be here. Thank you, Blake.
Yeah. So as is typical, I always like to start with learning a little bit about you. What can you share with me and the audience about your background and sort of how you ended up on the path that you are on and what you're going to share today?
It always feels like one of these questions, like when I explain it, it sounds so well structured and thought through, and it was like anything but that. But yeah, like the high level is it did engineering in school, engineer by training, thought I was going to be very technical, did a master's in engineering, got a job as an engineer, was working a great job, did my first real entrepreneurial thing. And I was like, ooh, I want to do business. Like I was very interested in not just the problem solving, like technically, but how do you build a great team? How do you turn a concept into, a successful business? And I didn't want to go back to school. I had done a lot of that, got very fortunate, found a startup not too far from me, said, hey, nothing on paper says I can do business. How about I come here and let's see what happens. Very, very fortunate. It worked out great. I learned a bunch, got to see what it was like to, raise money, do partnership deals. I got the okay, Jay, sit here, don't talk, but take notes. And you can get all the exposure you want, which was awesome. Founded a couple of my own companies, crashed one of them, wound up at Airbnb in the relatively early days there. So I got to see what the big up and to the right feels like. After that, I was building an AI company back before AI was the coolest thing on the planet to do, which was a really interesting, exciting time to be involved in it. And then hit kind of a challenging moment in my life that had me rethink it all, kind of question all the assumptions about how I was living, and shifted my focus to really helping people work better. How can you enjoy your job more, and how does that lead to more performance, and yada, yada, yada. Wrote a book, and now I'm talking to you. there's the arc.
It sounds like you had a lot of growth, a lot of change, a lot of momentum in your career. I worked in a startup fairly along in its startup phase. Stitch Fix, before it IPO'd, I helped launch their plus size business from scratch, and then
Nice.
IPOing not that much after. And so I know the level of resilience, adaptability, uncertainty, constant movement that happens in startups and the degree of devotion sometimes that can take. And so I'm interested to hear a little bit more about what happened in your career that was that big trigger or big change moment that caused you to say, whoa, what I'm doing isn't really what I want to do going forward. Because I believe that we all have those moments. And how you choose to handle those moments has a massive impact on your personal health, happiness, success, balance, all of those things. What was that moment? What were you experiencing that caused you to say, wait a second, this isn't working anymore?
It was an experience kind of in my life overall. And fortunately, it's not a joyous experience. I was building this AI company, very much your traditional type A, just like hard charging as hard as I possibly can. Had a young kid. And one day my parents went away on vacation and I got a phone call from my sister, and my sister was in the hospital. And she had gone for like a regular checkup to her doctor, and her doctor said, you got to go to the emergency room and get something looked at very quickly. And she was calling me because my parents were away and she wasn't sure what to do. And I went down to the hospital, and it was not a good scene. They were obviously very concerned. She was getting every scan very quickly. All the doctors were around her and paying attention to her. And we found out relatively quickly she had a very late stage, very aggressive form of cancer. And that was probably the worst moment in my life. And the second worst moment in my life was having to call my parents, who, like I said, were away on vacation, and tell them, I'm here with Rachel. It's not looking good. You got to get on a plane and get home. And it was it's not stuff that you forget. And 9 months later, my sister passed away before she turned 40. And, it's one of these things where if you don't question what's going on in your life and how you're living your life when something like that happens, I don't know, but it was a big, hard shove. It was something I never thought I would experience. It's my older sister, and watching her go through that and then coming out of the other end, as it does, change me in a very material way.
Yeah. I'm so sorry to hear that. Thank you for just being honest and sharing that experience. I know that you're not alone in that. And, what I often see is the hardest moments of our life often become incredible blessings that we didn't see in other ways. For you in that experience, was it just a recognition for you of like, man, I put so much drive and energy in my career and I need better balance? Or were there things that you looked at that you wish that you could have maybe changed for your sister that you felt like would have created a different outcome?
Kind of to both, I guess. I think the first thing with my sister that was probably the first real experience I had in my life, with my sister being ill, that I was powerless to do anything about. There was no amount of solution. And you mentioned startup resilience. It's like when you're in that kind of a space, see problem, smash problem, move on to the next problem. There was no amount of talking to doctors, finding this treatment, that treatment. There was nothing to do there other than like shifting my mentality, which was very hard for me, to one of like, how do I make this experience as good as it can possibly be for myself, my sister, and everyone around? It was very, very hard to feel that powerless. And, that was challenging. But I'm grateful that I had the recognition somehow in the moment, and, good conversations with my sister, and prioritized the time as we were going through it. And, I can look back at that time and say, I don't have regrets. It was out of my hands. And I think what it did for me, though, is it helped me realize I don't regret the way that I was living my life. I think it flipped the way I was thinking about it on its head, where I had always said that family was the most important thing for me. And I think what that meant was, and I've described it this way tons of times, in the past, was if I'm in a meeting and I get a phone call from the doctor's office because my kid was there and they need to talk about a thing, I will drop the meeting and deal with the doctor without question. However, I'm pouring 125% of myself into my work. And that's kind of hurting the way I'm showing up for everybody around me in the present. But the justification for it that I always had was, I'm doing this for my family. I didn't feel like I was doing it for ego. It wasn't because I wanted to be big and rich and famous. It was like, it's going to create some future imagined situation where it's all going to be great and we're all going to be really happy. And I had this very visceral experience that was, first of all, you may not get there. I had a very, very close and real experience with death that just showed me best laid plans, like you can't know. And the second thing was, well, who knows what it's going to be like when you get there. When you get there, if you're not living how you want to and you're not showing up how you want to on the way there, is it really worth it? And so I think that didn't change my prioritization, but it changed the way I was living my priorities day to day.
That's so good. What you speak about, one of my mentors often talks about espoused values. These are the things I say I value,
Right.
my values in action, and are in alignment. And I think that can be one of the hardest things for us to really look at as a mirror. If I say my family is first, but I'm constantly working all of the time, so much so that I'm rushing around to make it to my kids' things, or, don't have the time to have the real quality time on the weekends or at night or whatever with my kids, then is there a huge disparity between me saying this is my value and how I'm actually showing up in the world? For me, that was part of what I experienced in my corporate life, was that big shift of, really family and my kids being highest priority, but often my, fear, survival base, this is what it takes to survive and be successful in work and in my career, would end up driving my actions that were very different than how I actually wanted to be. And I think that is a really common thing that happens, especially for type A, especially for high achievers. And I think often what we don't realize is what you're talking about, which is, what time do you really have? And from a health perspective, what's happening as you're experiencing what you're experiencing? It's interesting. I had an experience a number of years ago. It was actually 2010. I had left a company I had been working 7 years, 70 hours a week. I knew inherently if I didn't leave that company, I was going to have a heart attack before I was 50. I just could tell the level of stress was so high. And I'd moved to another company and was really happy. And I had a friend that was at my old company, and she was 29 years old. And she and I were in a lot of discussions about the levels of stress she was under at work. The boss that she worked for, she did not feel safe underneath. The boss actually chastised her or made her feel unsafe to go to the doctor during the day.
That's not what you want.
Nope, that is not what you want. And she went to visit her brother the weekend before we were supposed to talk, and she was going to send me her resume. And she ended up getting violently ill and passing away at 29 years old.
Oh.
And that experience of looking at someone so young who was so sick, but ignored the internal signs of her sickness for the level of stress that she was putting on herself and her job on a daily basis, profoundly changed my perspective, because there is no job, no career ever worth your health or ever worth your life. And so I can really relate to your story about your sister in that, and that moment for me went, what in the world? Because I absolutely know that work scenario and the belief system she had, and her putting that job ahead of herself and her own personal health, was a huge contributing factor to her passing away at such a young age. And I think often when we get started in these careers and these high-powered, I got to keep moving up, I have all of this pressure, we believe that how we feel today is how we're going to feel tomorrow. And we can become really disconnected from ourselves, connecting to how we're feeling, how we're taking care of ourselves and others. And I see that a lot, especially with people in corporate, repeating the same types of cycles that I was in, that my friend Renee was in. And perhaps that might have been a contributing factor for your sister as well, of just not being able to be fully in touch with how they're feeling or taking care of themselves because of the pressure of everything else.
Yeah, again, sorry you had to go through that situation. And I think it seems like it does something similar for you that it did for me, in that, I always knew about post-traumatic stress, but it turns out there's this thing called post-traumatic growth, which is, the substantially happier, substantially lesser known, I guess, syndrome or whatever you call it, where I consider myself to be very fortunate that I had some very, very significant trauma in my life. And I'm one of the few lucky people who, for me, it turned into an incredible driver of growth. And I owe that to my sister. And, she lived her life in a very different way. She wasn't, operating the way that I was. I don't think there's anything she could have done differently to know that this was happening. It was going on in her body, and there were no real symptoms or signs that it was happening. And, she wasn't deprioritizing it to the best of my knowledge. college, she was just kind of always living her life in her way, and you know, it was a challenging experience to go through and reflect on her life and think about the impact on mine, and particularly to be able to sit here now and say, I've never felt more impactful with a unit of my time than I do right now. I've never felt more centered, more clear, or happier than I do right now. And for a long time, I dealt with a lot of grief because how can I say that? My life is, in most of the ways I can measure it, better now than it was when my sister was alive. And I couldn't talk about it. I didn't feel comfortable trying to say it. I felt like I was going to be judged, regularly, until I kind of realized the truth of it is, if I could bring her back, if I could give away everything that I learned between, then and now, to get her back, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I can't. And that's why now I'm kind of on this mission to just, like, you don't need the grief, to get the benefits. And it's recognizing that, the gift that I got, I would like to return, but parts of it were a gift nonetheless. And I think the best thing that I can do to kind of carry her memory forward, at least for me, is to share them as much as I can, and I think that's the thing I'm really passionate about doing now, is just showing how I still describe myself as a type A, but I think about it differently. I've never been more impactful, but I'm focused more on enjoying myself more along the way, because if you read the research, the more that you enjoy what you're doing, the better you do at it. It's not some fluffy, like, we got to sit around and kumbaya and all drink some Kool-Aid and, like, have our feet up and have fun all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But when you're in a zone, when you're enduring your employment all day long, like the odds that you're also going to be great at it are lower, right? Like, when you enjoy what you do better at it. And the better you do at it, the more you enjoy it. And the more you enjoy it, the better you do at it. It's this, like, amazing flywheel. And then when things are going really well at work, it spills over into the rest of your life. You have more energy, you're fired up for what's happening in life, and the better you feel in life, the better you do at your job, and up and up and up and up and up we go. So it's less of like my perspective radically shifted, and all of a sudden all I cared about was enjoying myself all the time. It was just a recognition of, like, I was over invested in the future and under invested in the moment, and how can I transition this a little bit more? I'm not saying, like, blow all your money and, like, don't think at all about the future, but are there some things you can do differently? And by just kind of questioning all the assumptions I had about how am I supposed to work and how am I supposed to live, I kind of started to see, like, a bunch of these assumptions aren't serving me. I can both accomplish a lot, be a high achiever, and be thinking about enjoying myself now, not just later. And I think that realization, which, I'm thick-headed, it took, like, I probably ran, I don't know, well north of 100 personal wellness and workplace experiments on myself, of, like, doing things in different ways. And I kept a tracker and, like, does this help? Does that help? I was working late, working early, working 6 days, 7 days, 2 days, 4 days, not setting goals, setting more goals, polyphasic sleeping, like cold plunges, you name it. Like, I've tried all of it. And the learnings that I was getting out of that were surprising to me. They were counterintuitive in a lot of ways. I thought it was like a scale where, well, you either enjoy it or you're impactful. It's rarely both. And what I learned is, actually, there are some core assumptions about the way that we're working. We can change these things. There are some pretty simple tactics you can put in place. And when you do, you enjoy it more, you do way better at it, and the impact on your life is, like, incredible.
I love it. Can you share with us some of what those are? What are some of the things you can put into place to figure out how to enjoy your career and therefore your life more?
Yeah, I think we can go in, whatever direction you want. Like, the idea from the book is basically to take, like, 9 of the most common workplace challenges and share an incredibly simple tactic. Like, the rule I had for the book is, if you can talk or you can type, you can try every tactic in my book. And the challenge with it is, you hear things like, I don't know, work smarter, not harder. That comes up all the time, right? I find that statement, like, borderline offensive. I don't wake up every day thinking, okay, what do I have to get done? And what is the absolute stupidest way that I can think of to accomplish these things? Like, I'm trying to work harder. I'm trying to work smarter, not harder. But, like, what do I do with that kind of a thing? And people say, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life, right? Like, okay, no one's trying to work a job they hate, right? And what I found is, actually removing things rather than getting things was what was most helpful. So examples of things like this, a common one I talk about all the time is, so in the United States of America, every year, $1.2 trillion is wasted from workplace miscommunications. Big, huge number, right? And they suck because you usually only find out about them afterwards. That's why we waste so much, right? I'm talking to you. We think about a project we're going to go and work on. There's been some fundamental misunderstanding. We go work on it, come back after 2 weeks, and it's like, oh, Jay, I wasn't thinking about it in that way. Like the work goes in the garbage. That sucks, right? 1.2 trillion. That number is really big. I would like to be able to visualize that amount of money. I can't. If you're a nerd like me and you do the math, that amount of money works out to a full day of lost productivity for every single employee every single week. So that's how much miscommunications are hurting us at work. And then you think, well, how do I improve this, right? If I could just fix my miscommunications, I could save a full day every single week, meaning I could literally do 5 days of work in 4 with no change, right? So you look into this and I'm thinking about miscommunications, and what I realize, it's like the most commonly taught problem with no solution. Everybody has played broken telephone, right? You probably at some point, or you've seen it happen. You tell the first kid whispers to the second kid, yada, yada, down the line. The last kid says a thing. Everybody laughs at how far off the last kid's message was from the first, including the teacher. And then we all say, good job, that's hilarious, ha, 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 ha. And no one says, here's how to fix this massive problem that, like, by the way, communication is like the single most important thing that you're going to need to work on if you want to like get along with other humans. And so that's like a massive problem. And I was looking at ways to try to improve communication. And one of the things I found is something called a brief back, which is used in the military. They use it in the military because it's not a ha 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 ha, we had a miscommunication. It's like loss of life if we aren't on the same page about something. They developed this technique called a brief back, which is effectively when a listener repeats back what they've heard. And it pretty much stops miscommunications in its tracks. Why doesn't this happen in the office? And the reason why is because it's really awkward and you can sound like a total jerk. And I'm like super lucky that I got to work with the team I was working with at the time because they were seeing that I was doing all this experimentation. And I tried a lot of ways to land a brief back. And what I can tell you from my experience is 90% of them make you sound like an absolute jerk. And nobody wants to work with you, right? So we might be talking about a thing, and I would say to you, oh, hey, Blake, can you just tell me what you just heard from me? I want to make sure you were listening. Nobody wants to work with that human, right? And so the rule that I like to tell people, and like the experimentation I tried to do to like distill it down into the book, is if you are going to use a brief back at work, it is going to solve miscommunications for you. It will result in you not getting so frustrated by them. It will result in you getting more productive time because you're not going to be miscommunicating. And the way to do it really well is to keep it focused on yourself, not the other person. So instead of, hey, I want to make sure you were listening, Blake, can you let me know what you're taking away? Because I want to make sure that I did a good job getting my point across to you. It's totally about my job communicating, not like your intelligence, your listening, your anything like that. And it's awkward the first time you do it because it feels a little bit weird. But if you do 3 of these brief backs, you will find at least one situation where there was some kind of miscommunication, and the other person will say, oh, Blake, thank you so much. Like, I can't believe you just saved me all this time that was going to get blown up from miscommunications. And this is like a simple tactic. Like I said, if you can talk, you can take that sentence I just uttered, you can say it the next time you communicate something at work. And from my experience, myself, and working with lots of folks implementing it in their day-to-day jobs, it fundamentally removes miscommunication, gives you all these benefits, and you wind up feeling better at the end of the week by removing something, not having to go and do some gigantic amount of professional development, not getting some promotion, not getting some giant raise. It's this small thing that you just build in as a habit, day to day, has this massive, massive impact on the way that you're performing and the way that you're feeling at work.
I love that. It's funny. I actually learned that technique back when I worked at Target, and what a huge impact it makes in moving things forward. And it's interesting. I think it seems very small, but there's usually what I find internal resistance to people applying that for the very first time. Because there's this whole thing of like, oh my gosh, I am going to get feedback. And what if I did something wrong? And a level of vulnerability of being willing to say, hey, can you share with me what you heard? Because I want to make sure I did a good job, right? It opens the door of someone going, you're a terrible communicator. No, I don't understand anything, or whatever it might be. But there is such incredible power in that. And I've seen exactly what you said, which is like, oh, the thing is identified, the person appreciates it. They actually feel that there's open dialogue. It becomes much faster and much smoother and much easier over time as a team. They begin to see how they maybe miscommunicate to people and start applying it as this beautiful ripple effect. And I agree with you. I think it's an interesting thing we spend a lot of time on, tactical skills, and yet almost all of the reasons why we're not successful as individuals, in relationships, and in companies is really our relationships with ourselves and with others, and being able to understand the blind spots that we have, what we actually need and what others need, and make sure that we are all in alignment and we're not perceiving things that are inaccurate.
Yeah, that's the whole point I'm trying to make is actually like you can go and do a whole whackload of professional development. And I'm not saying that that stuff's not going to help. I'm not saying that getting some new job or a promotion or jumping to a new project won't be beneficial. There are times when you need to do that, particularly if you're in a toxic environment. Sometimes changing the environment is what you need to do. But when you look at like the Great Resignation, millions of people changed jobs, and you ask them today, they did a big survey, 80% of people regret their decision to change jobs. I think that's because we don't change the way we work. You just go to a new place in a new environment, but because you have all of the same workplace challenges, whatever they might be, they just all come flooding back, right? If your communication isn't on point, you're going to wind up having miscommunications at the new place, just like you do at this place. And so it's like things like these where actually what I found is there are these small little tactics here and there, and it's great that you've experienced the brief back. It's not common in a lot of places where fix the miscommunication. Decision making's happening really slow. A lot of people feel like I can't do anything to speed up decision making, even though it's very frustrating because I'm five levels down from the CEO. It's not true. There is something you can do. Prioritization is a thing we talk about a lot, where like I just want to get more stuff done. Actually, in my opinion, it's like how to be more clear about what you're not going to get done that helps you get the most of it done. Imposter syndrome, something I touch on in the book, which comes up, I think, for a lot of folks. And, I think the conventional wisdom on it is broken. That's the spot I love to talk about as well. This idea that like, oh, if you feel imposter syndrome, self-doubt, conventional wisdom there is like, just believe in yourself, right? And I don't know a lot of people, myself included, that works for. I'm feeling self-doubt. What can I actually do about this thing? I can't just convince myself not to feel self-doubt anymore. There's not a lot out there. And I spent a whack load of time helping people with the problem and doing a bunch of research around it. And like, I just think there's a better way.
Oh, I completely agree with you. In fact, pretty much every single person has imposter syndrome, especially if you're a high achiever. And most of us don't even understand it. It's part of the growing up process and how you experience things as a child, and not being able to understand what your parents' reactions are. And then internalizing a lot of that. So I completely agree with you. I think there's so much conventional wisdom that's like hustle, grind, push through it, move forward, but you're never going to overcome your subconscious. You got to do the work. I also thought it was great you talking about the migration of people and jobs. This is a big thing I'm incredibly passionate about. It took me over a decade to be able to see the patterns I was going through of fulfillment and unfulfillment in my career. I worked at 5 different companies across 18 years. And what I always tell people, they always believe the problem is the toxic boss or the company or the career path that they're on, but they're actually not solving the root cause of why they're unfulfilled. And so to your point, you're just continuing that same cycle somewhere else and probably slightly improving some things, but still dealing with the core root problems because you are that same person moving. You believe it's your circumstances that need to change when almost always it's the internal that needs to change. And when the internal changes, then you can accurately either shift the external experiences that you're having or move into an environment that's better for you. And so I love hearing you talk about that. 80% doesn't surprise me. And it's a huge part of why I tell people if you're unfulfilled in your career, you should, and you really are not clear, like with great depth of why you're unfulfilled. Like it's not just, I feel undervalued or I'm tired of burnout cycles or I want more personal growth path. Like if you've had cycles of burnout or you've had cycles of being fulfilled and unfulfilled and you don't really understand very specifically exactly why, exactly what you need for your work, exactly how you work best, what that right environment needs to look like. If you don't do the deeper level of work, you will just end up back in the same place again after having spent all of that time and energy interviewing, starting over and going through that whole process.
Yeah, and This is why we call the book, your grass is greener. Like I want to show people that like you don't have to look over there. Like there's the common expression, it's always greener in somebody else's. It's true. I want to show people like you have more agency than you think you have. Like the job that you have can be better than you think it can be. And it's not through the things that you're being fed and told, need to change. Like that job title, sure, it's going to make you feel better for a little bit, but it's not the thing that's going to really move the needle. And I wanted to show folks a bit of a playbook of like, at a minimum, rather than assuming that making some environmental change is going to solve the problem, try to solve these 9 most common challenges at work. And if you try all of these and you see no change, then that's an indication that maybe it is something external that you need to go and shift on. But before you make that change, which is very hard to reverse, it's hard to get your old job back. It's hard to get back into the old culture. It's hard to find, what the good things that you might have had before you make that jump. Like just work through these things first. And, to your point, there's an exercise we cover in the book where this is something I do with a lot of the clients that I work with is I get them to get a 2-minute timer. People can do it at home, though I'm going to spoil the end point for everybody. But you get a 2-minute timer. Okay, you take out a piece of paper and write down everything that your iPhone is good at. Or if you're an Android person, write down what your whatever your smartphone's great at. 2 minutes, okay? And when that's done, you'll have a list of like all the things your smartphone does really well. I use it for maps. I like to email. I'm on Instagram. Like the whole list of things you think your phone does super well for you. When that's finished, go to the other side of the piece of paper, flip the timer over, and write down all the things that you are great at. And I will bet you that when you're done, because I've seen this happen many, 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 many times, either you will finish the smartphone list way faster than you finished the list about yourself, and or the smartphone list will be so much longer than the list about yourself. You might not even finish the list about yourself in 2 minutes. And the realization was like, we know more about the thing that we carry around in our pockets than we do about ourselves. And if you don't know what you're great at, it's hard to know how to deploy that in a workplace setting. And when you're not doing what you're great at, you're not doing the best work and you're not enjoying it. And that leads to this term that also drives me super nuts is like we're constantly being told about best practices. And I'm thinking like best for whom? The way that you do something and the way that I do something are unlikely to be the same way, the best for both of us. For sure, sometimes like you got to do a task, people have just done it, it's a little bit menial, there's just one good way to do it. But more often than not, going back to the cell phone example, like if I open up Google Maps and I have to go to like a restaurant or something, it's going to tell me how to get there, but I have options. Do you want to walk? Do you want to drive? Do you want it to be the most economical drive? Do you want it to go past the most parks? These are the options you get to see about how you want to go from A to B, right? The same is true at work. If you and I have to, let's say somebody asks us on Friday to give an update on about our project to the team. And you really like doing data analysis, and I really like giving presentations. Well, you should write an email to the team and figure out all the data analysis stuff and send it to them in advance and hop into a meeting and ask them if they have any questions about your analysis. I probably would have a lot more fun and do a much better job at turning it into a presentation and engaging the team and standing up and giving a talk. And if I gave you my talk and you gave me your data analysis job, we would not be happy doing it. We would both do subpar work against each other, but they both solve exactly the same problem, right? And so unless you have a good understanding to like double click on your point a bit about not just what is important for you in your career, but like what are you great at? What are you already really good at? It's hard to know how you should do your day-to-day job. And that's what leads us, I think, down the line of, well, I just do this in the best practice way, the way everybody else does it. Meanwhile, it's not enjoyable for me. I'm not great at it. And I'm just grinding away, churning out whatever widgets I happen to be churning out.
Yeah. And that's such a powerful conversation. This is something I'm also really passionate about. Very early on, we have a school system teaching us that we all should learn one way.
Right.
And math should be done this way. And if you don't show your work in the way they expect, you got it wrong. And so as a society, we've conditioned people to believe that there is a way to do things and this is it. And I think a lot of old traditional companies were really structured that way. But those companies that are really evolving, really learning and understanding how people work best, wanting to get the best out of their employees, wanting them to continue to grow within the organization, understand the nuances of how different people are motivated, how they're wired, how they work best naturally. And so as a result, I think, of our environment and conditioning, most people have very little self-awareness about actually how they work best and in which ways. And they actually believe everyone sees or does things the way they do. And that in and of itself, that lack of awareness can create really a significant unhappiness in your role or in your career or in the things that you're doing, because you're just doing stuff that isn't either in the way that you like or not really the stuff that you like that you're good at. And it can also create a lot of challenges, I think, for leaders, because if you don't know that about yourself, you certainly can't see it in other people. And or if you're uncomfortable allowing your team or people around you to work in the way that works best for them, that may not be the way that works best for you, you're actually stunting growth all the way across. So what I often say and often see in this work is the happier you become in your career, the more you know about your career, the better of a leader you are, the better you are inside the organization, the more you see these things in other people and you help them gain that level of autonomy or self-awareness or agency. It's a really, really beautiful thing. And I think sometimes it's the exact opposite of what people fear. People fear if I say, well, I want to do it this different way, that my boss will be upset or won't like it. And as a result of that fear or not having that knowledge, it actually is stunting everyone across the board.
Yeah, I think it's funny, I often will help teams with, corporate planning, quarterly planning, whatever you want to call it. And it almost always goes some version like this. Where are we trying to go? What are we going to do to get there? Right? It's like very reductive to take it down to that level, but we're so hyper focused on what we're going to do. And one of the most helpful things I've seen make a really big difference is to just get people to think about, well, how do you want it to feel along the way? Right? Take 10% of the time that you spend on planning. And once you get the plan together, well, how do we want this to feel? Actually, we want this to be like an enjoyable experience for folks because of what we're trying to do and how we want you. You know what? This is probably not going to be that fun for people. Like, we got to get this product out. It's going to be 2 weeks of like a really, everyone's going to be in here late, bashing away at this thing. Or we really want people to figure this out on their own. Or, you know what? This is the thing, we're going to tell them it's got to be done this way and exactly this way. It's not going to feel very empowering, but this is how we really want it to feel. The thing is those decisions are happening. They're just happening implicitly without us thinking intentionally about them. And so when you bring that out into the open and you say, okay, Blake, you have a great plan for the team now. How do you want it to feel for them? And I ask people this question and they're just like, what the heck what do you mean by that? And then we pull the intention out. And all of a sudden, then the leader is in a position where they can be much more intentional about the way they communicate it, the feeling that they're fostering on the team while it's happening. And I find that people tend to think like when people are working 70 hours a week, they're miserable. Untrue. There are situations in which 70 hours a week feels great, and there are situations in which 70 hours a week feels terrible. And like if you're working 70 hours a week for years like you were, good chance that's going to not go where you want. But I see people do their best work sometimes when they know there's a window here. There's 2 weeks. I'm about to go deep. We're working crazy hours. We're all in this thing together. It's going to be a grind. We're going to be eating pizza and just knocking it all out. And like, so be it. But they know the intention is not for this to be like it all the time. My boss knows that we're pulling crazy hours right now. They've intentionally asked for that. We're all on the same page that this is what we're going to do. That's very different than I'm busting a 70-hour week this week and you have your feet up on your desk because you don't think that that's really what's called for right now. And so just taking that little bit of time and saying, great, we've got a good what plan. How do we want it to feel? Brings it into the forefront, lets people figure it out. And I've seen that simple question have such a big impact for teams.
That's so good. I love that. I think it's so powerful and so easy to use. And I think it's also equally useful as an individual. How do I feel every day going to work? And what's the difference between how I feel today and what that is? And I just want to encourage whoever's listening, because I have you here today sharing your expertise because we share an equal passion for helping people live more fulfilling careers and lives, right? Take better care of themselves, take agency and recognize that they can control and create what they want for their careers and lives instead of working for some future thing that may or may not ever happen. So this beautiful question of how do I want my life to feel? How do I want my career to feel? and then be able to identify where doesn't it feel that way and what can I do about it today? How can I take some movement forward to change that is super powerful.
And I think that's I couldn't agree more. But that's where a lot of the rhetoric that is out there, I think, doesn't help people because it feels like what's required to make it feel better or for you to do better is some massive shift, right? Meanwhile, we all know that when we accomplish something incredible in our lives, it's usually not a like some massive shift happened overnight. It's usually the culmination of a whole bunch of small steps that we took over time. Almost any accomplishment, usually winds up looking at. You win the lottery, that's a little bit different. There are things that break that rule, obviously. And so what I try to unwind in folks and what the whole book is really trying to push on is you don't have to take a massive step. To your point, you can take that like iPhone egg timer exercise I gave you earlier. You will wind up with a list with hopefully at least one thing on it that you enjoy doing at work. And all that you need to do to like put that into action to see something change is to do some amount of it tomorrow, even if it's 2 minutes. If you're like, you know what I really enjoy doing? I really enjoy like knocking ideas around with Blake, or I really like spending a minute at the coffee area to talk to someone, or I really like jamming on this kind of a problem statement, or I really like sitting by myself and going through an Excel spreadsheet to like whatever it might be, carving out 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes tomorrow and just doing a little bit of it. Because by definition, that means tomorrow is going to be a little bit better than today was. And you stack together 5 of those and you get a better week. And then you stack together 4 of those weeks and you get a better month. And then you stack together 3 of those months and you get a better quarter. And before you know it, like you're rocking and rolling. And so I don't love the rhetoric that's out there that says, in order for you to enjoy your job more, you need some massive change. You got to get promoted. You got to get a new job, whatever it might be. Like you said, what can you just do tomorrow so it feels a little bit more like the way you want it to feel? And I just feel like there's almost a total vacuum of that kind of thinking and clear tactical advice that people can use so they actually know what to go and do rather than just like, okay, yeah, sounds great in theory. That's awesome for Joe in accounting, but it won't work great for me.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think there is a lack of just simple solutions on a day-to-day basis that you can be more present and enjoy your job. And I would also say there are times when your advice is very dangerous. If you've got somebody who has been really unfulfilled for a long period of time, they are completely burned out, only going to work because they need the money, feeling increasing frustration, emotionally detached from their work. And if I were to say on a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled are you in your job and have you been for a period of time? If somebody is sitting at a 5 or below and then have all of those signs and symptoms, taking slow action like what you're suggesting actually puts them quite a bit at risk of what I call the breakdown moment. If you wait too long, and you continue too long on the wrong path, and there are too many things that are misaligned, and those are all signs and symptoms of that, you'll hit the breakdown moment, and one of 2 things will happen: performance plan or layoff, or severe emotional or physical breakdown. And then you're talking about pretty significant financial or personal hits. So, but to your point, I think as a society, we look at extremes of things, and most people assume extreme when maybe it doesn't need to be. Right? Like if you're a 7 or 8 in your job and there are things that bother you, just taking small things to your point might get you to a 9 or a 10. And it didn't require some massive change. But if you are somebody this has been pervasive and you're really unfulfilled, often what I find is we're misdiagnosing how much at risk we are. Like I recently took on a client that was frustrated. He was going through these cycles of not being able to get promoted in his career. And so came to me and just said, I'm really frustrated. I feel undervalued. I'm not moving up where I want to go. The more we start discussing, and I ask him this question, how fulfilled are you in your career and life on a scale of 1 to 10? He tells me a 3. That's very dangerous when you're running at a 3. This is very scary. You are in a lot of risk at that point. And then he starts explaining to me some of the things happening inside the organization. He's being micromanaged and having to like specifically list out stuff to his boss that nobody else is. He was passed over and not considered for a job that somebody else was who isn't a super high performer. These are all things I looked at and I said, based on my experience doing this hundreds of times with people, you are actually really, really at risk. And you don't even know it because it's like the frog in boiling water. It just seems normal.
Yeah.
So I 100% agree with you in that most people are probably jumping to create a big change when if they did these small things could make it a lot better. But I would also caution that if you're in a situation where you have gone through multiple cycles of burnout, you are experiencing these increased levels of frustration, emotional detachment from work, you're not passionate about the things that you're doing, you're just going through the motions, and you're a 5 or below in terms of fulfillment, those are really important signs to stop and say you likely do need help and you need to make some more significant moves quickly because time is not in your favor.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not saying that, like, I think to say that there's ever a one size fits all solution would be like arrogant in pretty much any walk of life. I think there are certainly times when you are at the extreme edge in any way where some kind of radical intervention is certainly needed. But it would be interesting to like talk through the case of this person or like talk about folks that I've worked with. I think like the back third of my book is all about how to progress faster without waiting for a promotion, because the promotion is entirely out of your hands. You can work your ass off, and maybe your boss doesn't give you the job, maybe you get passed over for it, maybe the job actually isn't there available for you. And again, back to your point earlier, is like, what is it that promotion is doing for you that you can't do for yourself in some way? Of course it comes with things like external prestige and more money, and those things are things. I'm not trying to say that that's not a factor in any way, shape, or form. But like, can we find this particular individual and say, okay, how do we start making some systematic changes here such that, like, I think what we probably agree on, regardless of the intervention, is like, you got to kink the curve in the other direction as fast as humanly possible, right? And if this person's on like a downward trend, how do we start showing that the momentum is tracking up? And I think those are, common things that I've heard as well from folks. Is I've been passed over for promotion so many times. It's very, very frustrating. And often I find that there's something a little bit more deep seated under there. And often I find we assume that, I am somehow better when you give me a job title spike. Like, it doesn't actually change my performance as a human being. It might change my own perception of it or what other people are seeing. And so really trying to unpack, what's that promotion going to do for you? How's that going to make a difference? The micromanagement thing, there are other things there. For me, that's all about chapter 3. But like, I agree with you that you don't have all the time in the world. I think the argument I'm trying to make is, yes, and if you aren't sure what to do, taking even a small step is going to have impact for you. The most important thing is to start.
Yes.
Right? You got to start. You got to start shifting the direction of the curve. And even if that's a small step to start, better to start with the small step than to keep waiting, expecting that because the step I want to take is so huge, I'm always getting ready to take it, getting ready to take it, getting ready to take it, and never taking it. Can I at least help you find a step that is the first step that shows you that, I can start to see that maybe I can turn this thing around. Maybe it is something I can flip into the other direction. So
I think we can so get stuck in the enormity of trying to understand what it is that we don't move. And to your point, you can make radical improvement in your job within a matter of weeks. All the time, see that with my clients. I'm sure you do with yours, right? And when you feel better on a day-to-day basis, you also have more clarity and you can be more strategic about the decisions you need to make, and you can understand what you're actually experiencing. And often, if we're so deep in feeling like the answer lies outside of us or we don't have control, we are really missing the ways of which we're being called to take care of ourselves or take those opportunities on ourselves. And when we believe it lies outside of us, it's very difficult to take action to actually create what we want. But when we start recognizing the power that we have, it gives us more agency to create even more change. So thank you so much, Jason. This has been such a great conversation. We even ran over. So with that said, my last question to you, is there anything I didn't ask you I should have, or anything you just love to share before we wrap up?
Your show. So anything that you should have asked me that didn't ask me that you should have, absolutely not.
How about your book?
Love the questions. Book, I think
how can they find it?
Book, easiest way to find it is just to go to yourgrassisgreener.com. There you can find all the links if you do want to pick it up or get in touch. Like, love to hear from folks. It's also available on like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like wherever you get books. And I'd love folks to check it out. It's meant to be very, very highly tactical, and it's meant to come at some of these conventional problems from a relatively unconventional direction. And, the best part about it is you pick it up, you try them, you see what happens. To your point, in a couple of weeks, you'll either see that it's shifting direction for you, or it's increasing, how much better you're feeling or how you're performing, or it won't. Like that's what a lot of the feedback has been so far is just, hey, I like that this is tactical. Sometimes a lot of these thoughts are big and high and up and in your head, and how do you actually put them into action? So yourgrassisgreener.com is the easiest place to find it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. It's been a pleasure. And I'm excited for our audience to be able to take and just apply one or two things from today to see the impact it can make for them.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. And thanks for everybody that made it all the way to the end with us. I really, really appreciate it.